Hey guys, Rukshan here and welcome to an episode of Realtime. Today I'll be looking at the extension of the snap lockdown in Victoria. And, it wasn't much of a snap lockdown, was it? When we look back at last week and how Brett Sutton and James Merlino, the Victorian Labor government, sold it to us, it was purely that they needed extra time for the contact tracers to do their marvelous gold standard work. And here we are, 7 days later. They're telling us that yes, they're doing an excellent job. Contact tracing is going really well, but now they're worried about fleeting contact. They're worried about stranger to stranger transmission. So therefore, we need to extend for another 7 days. Now, I just want to call this out because it's very obvious when they announced the lockdown last week that the 7 days was never going to be 7 days. If you've been watching these press conferences and keeping an eye on how these things are handled by the Victorian government and by Brett Sutton and the health team in Victoria, you can tell from their language, the words that they use, the way they approach these things that, they're not being completely honest with the public. So, and a lot of the things surrounding what happened last week with the snap lockdown, to give the contact tracers time, that gave it away that this would definitely be extended. Now, it's more than possible that Brett Sutton and the health team went to the government and asked for a 2-week lockdown or a longer lockdown last week, and maybe in the negotiations they came down to about, let's start with 7 days and make it more palatable for the Victorian public. I feel like that's what's happened because in the background last week, you had the Victorian government trying to negotiate with the federal government for some sort of JobKeeper type extension program or some sort of wage subsidy and all this kind of stuff. Now, if you're just planning on doing a snap lockdown so your contact tracers have time to get these things in order, you don't really need to be looking at implementing such a program like JobKeeper or something like that again. So I think this was always a long-term style lockdown that they wanted. And everything they do is just to, not get the Victorian public offside with them by telling the truth from the get-go. And what they should have done last week was just being honest. What they should have done today, which they didn't do again, is just be really upfront and honest and tell the people what I feel is happening, right? And this is my opinion. I don't think this ends with a 7-day extension of this lockdown. We are looking at most of June and maybe parts of July with restrictions. Over the summer, over the last few months, we've really enjoyed our freedoms that they gave us because of all our sacrifices last year. We've enjoyed our COVID normal, and a lot of people have really forgotten about how we ended up in this point to begin with. Because if we take it back to 2020 with Daniel Andrews and Brett Sutton at the helm back then, what they promised the people of Victoria, okay, I know they can't maybe keep these promises because of the global pandemic and the changing nature of the situation, but what they really promised was that, they're doing all this groundwork now, that they're doing, all this kind of supercomputers and all this modeling and all these things that they're doing in the background, and because of that, we have to make this extremely large sacrifice of being locked down for like 100+ days, and it'll all be worth it because once we figure out all these things, we can enter into a COVID normal where, the impacts on our lives, the impacts on our businesses, the impacts on families, the impacts on children at school, all those things can now be managed because we've learned how to deal with it. And the reason we've learned how to deal with these things is because the people of Victoria sacrificed so much last year and the start of this year to be in this position. And if we look at today, what was all that for? It looks like almost for nothing. I watched Brett Sutton today, and nothing had changed from Brett Sutton from last year in a positive way, okay? He is probably more cautious and more negative in the sense of the way he's dealing with this issue. There is a lot of fear in what this guy, how he approaches this whole topic. There was a point in today's press conference where he just kind of started again mumbling and comparing things to Thailand and Taiwan. These countries in Asia with a totally different system to Australia. It's totally not comparable. But like they deviate into comparing our situation in Victoria, our situation in Australia, to countries overseas, and saying, oh, look, we're doing so much better than India, or we're doing so much better than the US and Europe, and that's because everything we're doing is great. And, like for me, and I think for a lot of Victorians and Australians, the benchmark really is the other states. Okay, so I'm looking at what's happening in the other states. Now, Brett Sutton and stuff come back to these questions that some of the reporters are putting to them, and saying, well, no one else has dealt with the, Indian variant, and it's so like, infectious and all this kind of stuff, and they come up with all these things. But that's all hypotheticals, like we were meant to have built this great system for tracing all this stuff and dealing with any type of variant, really, without impacting the lives of Victorians in this manner. So it's disappointing to see that lockdown is still their only go-to weapon against these things. In Victoria, they're very lockdown happy. And for anyone that's wondering how we should be planning the rest of our life going forward over the next few months, especially during winter, my opinion is that we will see these restrictions continue. We will see the possibility of more lockdowns. And it's going to be that way unless there is a change. And unfortunately, there can't be a change in the government. But at least when it comes to people like Brett Sutton, these bureaucrats, we should really be putting pressure on our elected officials to get rid of them. They're not elected. They don't have a tenure or a term that they've got to be there for, whatever it is. These guys aren't doing their job. They're failing. He's had multiple opportunities to prove himself, and he's failed on each occasion. The other dude, the testing commander, Jerome, whatever his name is, same story there. These guys and their contact tracing teams and all this kind of stuff, it's just a complete cluster. Okay? We really need to put pressure to change these things over. And the other thing that we have to do, and that a lot of people probably don't know about, is that these restrictions that they're putting in place, these lockdown measures, what are they using to justify this? Because no one has actually seen their justification for it. Now, there's independent MPs in Parliament, MPs from the opposition, who are trying to get this kind of the paperwork, I guess, the justification for these lockdowns, but they're being stonewalled by the government. There's actually, I think, a case before VCAT of the Andrews administration. They're trying to stop the opposition from getting information about how the justification for the curfew that we had last year. Okay, why would a government try to hide all this type of information? Every day we hear public health advice this, public health advice that. Everything we're doing is because of public health advice. And the honest part of that is that there's nothing public about any of this advice. No one actually knows how these decisions are being made, and what justification is being given to having a 5 kilometre radius or a 10 kilometre radius now, to having regional ring of steel, to having mask mandates, to having, why they didn't have QR codes before in the shopping centres and now all of a sudden they do. Like, no one understands how these things are happening in this state. And people that are trying to get this information are being stonewalled. And also the other major issue with all of this is, are any of these measures that they're putting in place proportionate? Are these lockdowns proportionate to the situation that we're facing? Is the 10 kilometre radius thing proportionate? It's just a little snap decision in their mind that all of a sudden, we can have 10 kilometres now. So why was it 5 kilometres to begin with if they knew from last year that it was okay to have a 10 kilometre limit? Why did they make it 5? Why are these decisions being made? And these are the things that we really need to push for ourselves as well. We really need to demand this information, because the people that are putting pressure on them in the parliament they're not getting anywhere. And I think if more people spoke up about this, maybe there might be a chance of getting some of these documents released to the public. Because definitely the media, they don't really cover any of this, right? The media spends all their time, the mainstream media that is, spends all their time talking about fleeting contacts, talking about the absolute beast of a virus, quoting Brett Sutton. The media is not interested in giving people this type of information. They are more interested in selling you fear. Whereas, the truth of getting to the bottom of all of this is really that information that is being used to justify this. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching this video. I'm going to make a few more videos going forward about the situation in Victoria. There's a lot to unpack as it relates to what's happening right now. The main takeaway from this video, I guess, is we need to pay a much closer attention to Brett Sutton. I think he should be sacked. I don't think it'll happen, but he's definitely one guy that has really stuffed it up multiple times now, and he's just all over the place. Yeah, see you guys next time.